Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles, and let's discuss these topics in complete detail and ensure that we go beyond the article for a comprehensive coverage so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before I start, I have a very important message for UPSC aspirants who are all set to give their prelims examination tomorrow. So, first of all, I would like to wish you all the very best. And also remember, you have already put in all the hard work that was required for months and months, probably even for a couple of years. You guys have slogged it out. You have made enormous sacrifices. Now, this is the time to stay calm, to maintain your composure. Don't panic at the last minute. Don't try to read everything that is possible. Today is a day where you relax, you take your time for yourself, you maintain that composure and get prepared for the examination tomorrow. So go ahead, give your best, and I wish you all the very best. So, with this, let's get started and look at the first article. On page number 6, The Hindu carries an editorial that examines PM Modi's recent visits to 5 countries, especially the European countries. Over a span of 5 days, Prime Minister Modi carried out a whirlwind visit to multiple countries, starting with United Arab Emirates, then the Nordic Scandinavian countries, including Sweden and Norway, then as well as Netherlands. And on the way back, PM Modi even traveled to Italy. Then in Norway, the Prime Minister participated in the third India Nordic Summit, interacting with other important Nordic nations, including Iceland, Denmark, and Finland. So, this high profile visit has some major outcomes, and that is what we are going to examine in this discussion. Of course, this visit has it had its share of media attention, social media attention, and as well as some controversies as well. I'm sure you must have seen the melody moment between Prime Minister Modi and Giorgio Meloni. Then there was the press controversy where a reporter uh, questioned the Prime Minister as to why the PM doesn't take questions from the press. Now, while it is a prerogative of a leader to not take direct questions from the press, particularly on foreign visits, this raises questions regarding whether the government is in a position to take those questions and answer the press directly. But controversies and all the social media virality aside, let's focus on the core issues that were discussed and the key outcomes of this important visit. Now, what really stood out during this visit is particularly the timing of the visit. Because, see, the India Nordic Summit was supposed to take place last year, but because of the Pahalgam attack and India's Operation Sindoor, India had to call off the third India Nordic Summit, which was supposed to be held last year itself. So now, India and Nordic countries have gone back to the drawing table and they have revived that partnership. It had been 4 years since the last India Nordic Summit had taken place. And also, the visit to UAE, along with these critical European countries, it comes at a very crucial time, particularly in the midst of the ongoing Iran war and also the Ukraine war, which continues to drag. If India is more concerned about the implications of the Iran conflict, Europe is more worried about the Ukraine war and Russia's aggression. Europe would expect India to express more solidarity with them. And the European leaders were quite open as well about urging India to try and influence Russia to bring this war to an end and to secure European security guarantees. Whereas for India, this was about handling the current supply chain disruptions, particularly for energy supplies, oil and gas supplies, and diversifying the trade opportunities. Because we are dealing with a very unstable world, particularly with the US resorting to tariff wars, then US and Israel resorting to the Iran war in blatant violation of international norms. So, this was essentially the focus of the visit: the growing alignment between India and UAE in the energy and strategic domain, the growing trade links with Europe, and the common concerns that we have about current global developments. This was the main focus of the discussion. So, one of the key outcomes, which is clearly noticeable in this visit, is the mutual concern that all the countries have expressed about the destabilization of the international rules based order. So, this is a reference to Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the US Israeli aggression against Iran, Iran's continued blockade of Hormuz in violation of international norms, and as well as China's aggression across the Indo Pacific. The blatant disregard that China often shows for international law. This is seen by some of the big global powers. And countries like India, UAE, and even European nations have been paying the price for this. So there have been discussions centered around these conflicts where all sides have agreed that it's of great importance to respect and uphold international rules based order, to rein in these global powers which are dismantling the international rules based system. But apart from this, there has been a lot of focus on trade diversification, especially after India and EFTA countries signed a free trade agreement which became operational last year. In 2025, the India EFTA free trade agreement has come into effect. Now, the EFTA countries, the European Free Trade Association, it comprises of Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. So, during this visit, the Prime Minister not only visited Norway and interacted with Norway's leadership, but also interacted with the leadership of Iceland, as Iceland is part of the India Nordic Summit. So, the leaders have taken stock of the operationalization of the FTA. And don't forget, the recently announced India EU FTA, which might be signed and ratified this year. And the Prime Minister is expected to travel to Europe multiple times in the coming months. That also shows the growing political commitment and diplomatic realignment of India's foreign policy. In the last couple of years, the Prime Minister has carried out multiple visits to Europe, even central and eastern parts of Europe. Prime Minister Modi visited Ukraine, Poland, and more recently Croatia, Cyprus. And in a related development, the President of Cyprus has just visited India, which we will cover in the later part of the session. So we have been prioritizing all the regions of Europe, from Western Europe to the Mediterranean belt, to the Balkan region, to Eastern and Central parts of Europe, and as well as the Nordic and the Scandinavian belt. So India realizes that Europe is not only one of our largest trading partners. I mean, if you take the whole region into account, India EU trade relationship could even surpass our trade relations with US and China. And given the American trade policies and the tariff wars of Donald Trump and China's weaponization of its trade advantages for geopolitical gains, it's only natural for India and the European trade partners to work together to diversify their export markets. European region can be a great investment source for India as well, particularly within the Nordic region. Countries like Norway, even Finland, Netherlands, they sit on massive piles of sovereign wealth fund, which can be channeled as investments into the Indian market. Indian exports can find a bigger market in these parts of Europe as well. Right now, when you look at the trade relations between India and Nordic countries, it's quite moderate. And there is plenty of scope and opportunity to scale up the bilateral trade between both sides. So, trade diversification, finding each other's markets, simplifying the trade policies, this remains a top focus and priority. So, Prime Minister Modi has been prioritizing all parts of Europe. And in the coming months, as I said, there will be multiple visits which are planned ahead. Next month, for example, PM Modi would be attending the G7 outreach meet, which will be hosted by France. Then later on, there is a planned visit to Slovakia. That again shows how India is prioritizing even some of the minor countries in Europe, countries which were previously neglected, countries previously which were not given adequate priority. So Central Eastern Europe and the Balkan region has been becoming a big priority for India, and it synchronizes with the vision of the IMEC corridor, the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor. So countries in this part of Europe, they can create a gateway for us to access the European markets. And the Prime Minister would visit Brussels later this year once the India EU FTA is signed and ratified. And this again would bring India closer to the European nations. So, focus on trade diversification, enhancing the trade linkages, and driving investments has been one of the key focus areas of this visit. In fact, if you look at the India EFTA free trade agreement, there is $100 billion investment guarantee that EFTA countries have made in return for market access into the Indian market. India has opened up some of its sectors for exports from the EFTA countries. In return, India has extracted a binding commitment that EFTA nations would invest up to $100 billion in India over the next 15 years. So, this even created a new template for FTAs where we tie market access with investments. But the real priority of the visit was mainly to secure energy and resource access and supply chain stability. The supply chains, which have largely been disrupted by the ongoing conflicts, especially the Iran war, and we have seen this even during the start of the Ukraine war as well. It has become of great priority for these nations to build that resilience in supply chains, create alternate supply sources for key energy products and even mineral resources. So, be it the visit to UAE or the visit to Europe, it was mainly centered on energy security. This visit was more about securing those different supplies of energy to India, which can grant that energy independence to India. With UAE, India has finalized a long term strategic petroleum reserve project. The UAE has already been one of the key backers of India's strategic petroleum reserve project. But now the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, which is a state-owned oil company by the Emirati monarchy, will become a long-term partner to provide reliable supplies for India's petroleum reserves, guaranteeing a degree of energy independence for India, which could even help reduce our dependency on Hormuz and other Gulf countries. Don't forget, recently the UAE has even quit the OPEC and OPEC Plus, meaning it is not constrained anymore by the production cuts. UAE reserves the right to ramp up production if the need arises to match the existing global demand, and this can be good news for India. Plus, UAE is also planning a land bypass route to bypass the Hormuz Strait. It is working on a pipeline linking the key UAE oil basin with Fujairah on the other side of the Persian Gulf, which would effectively allow UAE and its oil and gas supplies to bypass the Hormuz Strait. And this would directly benefit India, given the close strategic ties that we have with the country. Then, with the European nations, particularly with Netherlands, and as well as with Nordic countries such as Norway, Finland, even Denmark, and Sweden. These countries are seen as leaders in clean renewable energy, be it in the field of solar and wind, or battery storage solutions, or even in the field of, let's say, nuclear energy and as well as cleaner sources of hydrogen fuel. These countries are pioneers of clean renewable energy. And it is this technology that India seeks from the European nations to further build its energy resilience. So, the partnership with the Nordic nations, Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, etc., could grant that energy resilience for India. Then there have been discussions and proposals regarding establishing mineral supply chain security as well for critical and strategic minerals. In fact, when India recently hosted the AI Impact Summit, leaders of the Nordic region were also participating. And there have been discussions on AI collaboration, AI governance, and securing the required mineral supply chains, the critical minerals from lithium to rare earths, which are crucial for critical emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. So these Nordic Scandinavian nations, they're also leaders in global tech. For example, Netherlands is absolutely pivotal for the AI sector, as Netherlands has the only company in the world which produces the lithography machines which are needed for producing your GPUs or graphic processing units, which are the backbone of AI data centers. No other company in the world can produce these lithography machines. Even giant companies like Nvidia are dependent on the lithography machines from this Dutch company. So, India's Tata Group has entered into a direct deal with ASML Corporation to gain access to these sensitive technologies, which can transform and shape the future of the world. Then we also saw further progress in India's research efforts in the Arctic region, which will step up our economic and geopolitical presence as well. Especially through Norway, India has already been very, very active in the North Pole from many, many years. For at least 2 decades, we have been focusing heavily on Arctic research. Though the Antarctic research program has always been a bigger priority since 1980s. In the last 2 decades, we have prioritized Arctic research as well. India even has a active research station, Himadri, at Svalbard, which belongs to Norway. India had even deployed a submersible observatory called IND-ARC, again near Svalbard with assistance from Norway. We have even contributed to the seed bank, the global seed bank located at Svalbard in collaboration with Norway. So, this not only enhances our scientific collaboration in the Arctic Circle, this could pave the way for India's strategic and economic presence as well, as the new sea routes are opening up in the polar areas due to melting ice caps, and new shipping routes are becoming viable. India's partnership with these Arctic states will be of great significance. We already have a partnership with Russia to work on the northern sea route that can create a much shorter shipping route between the western and eastern hemispheres. And since China is already being a very active player in the Arctic shipping route, India would also like to make its presence felt. So our ties with Russia, our involvement with Northern Sea Route project, and now the new initiatives with the Nordic states, which are also part of the Arctic Council, will tremendously help India to step up its presence and influence in the North Pole. So these key outcomes, it cannot be overshadowed by whatever controversy happened or whatever social media triviality that was seen. Right? It clearly illustrates how prioritized diplomatic relations can secure long-term national interests. Now, for prelims, please be aware of the basic facts related to India Nordic Summit. India Nordic Summit was initiated back in 2018, and it brings India together with these Nordic nations. The term Nordic is a much broader and wider reference compared to the term Scandinavia. Scandinavia is a very narrow cultural and geographical reference, whereas the Nordic region includes Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden as well. Right? The second such summit was held in Copenhagen, hosted by Denmark in 2022. And the third summit was supposed to happen last year. But as I said, it had to be postponed because of Pahalgam attack. And now the third summit has taken place in Oslo, hosted by Norway. And the next summit, the fourth India Nordic Summit, is slated to be held in Finland. So remember these basic facts, which could be very relevant for the prelims exam. Now, based on what we have discussed about India's relations that are growing with the Nordic nations, take up this mains practice question and please try to practice your answer writing. Now, let's move to the second topic based on this important column on page number 6. We have a very interesting article that examines the spectacular rise of the Cockroach Janata Party on social media, particularly on Instagram. I'm sure many of you must have already followed the page of Cockroach Janata Party, or at least you must be aware of this rage which has developed on social media. So let's understand and interpret the rise of this political mobilization. Does it really mean there is an anti-establishment anger amongst the youth, particularly amongst the Gen Z? Or is it just another trivial trend which will dissipate and die out eventually? So let's understand what's behind this spectacular rise of a new political mobilization that we are seeing primarily on social media. So, as you're aware, last week on 15th May, the Chief Justice of India made a very controversial remark. It was not part of a final judgment, but the judge, the CJI, passed this as a reference, as a passing statement, calling India's youth, particularly the younger generation, as lazy, unemployed, and he referred to them as cockroaches. So, this remark of the CJI went viral on social media. It, of course, instigated and triggered many of the youth and the younger generation, and it created a big backlash. And this led well-known political activist Abhijit Deepke, formerly associated with the Aam Aadmi Party, to launch the Cockroach Janata Party. So, an Instagram page was opened, right, just 5 days ago, and a website was created. A so-called manifesto was also released, and within hours, this went viral on Instagram, particularly on the Instagram platform. So, look at the latest following: 21.7 million. I mean, even the most established political parties in India, be it Congress or BJP, even they don't have this extent of following on social media, even after years of having the presence on social media platforms. In just hardly 5, 6 days, this massive mobilization that you see, along with all the memes and satire and arguments and counter arguments that are floating on social media, it has brought up a huge debate that does the current political establishment and the ruling establishment, do they really understand the aspiration of our younger generation? Is this political anger being expressed by the youth? And can we compare this with recent Gen Z movements that we have seen in Bangladesh or Nepal? Or is it incorrect to make a comparison? Is it apples and oranges? And what is really driving this mobilization? Does it really have any real political value? Tomorrow, can we see Cockroach Janata Party as a real political party contesting elections? Would it be able to actually mobilize voters and swing elections? Would that happen? Or is it just a myth? Or is it just a trivial trend which is going to die out in few days? So let's try to understand this. So first, I want you to look at this web page that Abhijit Deepke created. It clearly mentions that this party is the voice of the lazy and the unemployed, a reference to the Gen Z, which was in a way humiliated by the Chief Justice of India's remark by equating them with cockroaches. Now, when you look at India's developmental story, right, India has come a long way in the last 3, 4 decades in particular, in terms of job creation, in terms of meeting the economic and social aspirations of the country's population. But still, there are many pressing challenges that remain in the country. And especially the youth, they do feel disenfranchised, they feel disenchanted, they feel disillusioned. The lack of education opportunities, the lack of job opportunities, the lack of growth opportunities, it does affect millions amongst the younger generation in the country. Though there are tremendous opportunities in India as a fast growing and developing nation, It's a lived reality for millions of youth in the country that they have to struggle, they have to fight it out. And despite the best effort, they may not make it. And a large part of the blame does lie with the system. It does lie with the government, the poor administration, the persistent corruption, and the repeated failures of the state, which was very clearly evident with the recent NEET paper case, paper leak incident, exposing the inefficiency within the state establishment. In fact, one of the main demands of Cockroach Janata Party is to ensure that the education minister resigns. This has been one of the demands the party has been pressing on social media, and it has generated quite some traction as well. So there is definitely a disconnect between the political establishment and the younger generation. There's no doubt about it. But this is the case across the world. And also, please understand this anger may not be directed just at the ruling establishment. This is not just a regular anti incumbency trend that you're seeing. See, it's quite common to see a certain element of anti incumbency, that too after a government has been in power for several years, for 2, 3 terms. It will naturally lead to an anti establishment sentiment. And especially the youth who tend to be politically active. At least they want to be politically active, they want to express their political views and their aspirations. They will naturally develop an anti establishment trend. And this phenomena is seen across the world, and even centuries ago, decades ago, it has been the same trend. The anti establishment, anti incumbent trend is quite common. But however, the remark was made by the Chief Justice of India. So, probably what has triggered the youth here is not just the remark itself, it's the overall disillusionment with India's growth story. While they hear about India performing much better than before, outperforming itself, outperforming its peers, there are still pressing challenges on the ground, and the actual lived reality for the youth might be different than what the government is claiming. So there could be an element of that distrust against the establishment which is building up, right? And it's not just against the ruling establishment, it's against the entire political class. It's about the rampant corruption and inefficiency in the system, which has been bred and tolerated for decades, and the disconnect, the generational gap between the old political guard and the younger political generation which is coming up. The one of the biggest complaints amongst the youth, amongst the Gen Z, is that the older generations, they don't get them, they don't understand them, which is very true, which is a very valid concern as well. Now, can we really compare this with what happened in, let's say, Bangladesh or Nepal, where the Gen Z mobilization, which was largely a decentralized, unorganized mobilization initially, turned into an organized, violent protest movement, toppling the regimes? Is it a right way to compare that? See, when you look at the actual situation in both the cases, there is a stark difference in the context and the circumstances. I think it's unfair and incorrect to compare the Cockroach Janta Party rising in India with what happened in Bangladesh and Nepal. It's like comparing apples and oranges. But yes, one common element is the frustration of the youth, the anger of the youth, and the political uh, anger and the sentiment which is coming out from the younger generation. That could be the probable common thread. But this is true everywhere. In most countries, you will find such anti establishment sentiments, anti political sentiments. But in Bangladesh, Nepal, the circumstances were entirely different. In Nepal, you had years and years of political instability and a highly corrupt political class which was known for enriching itself. Then Bangladesh was another story altogether, with a mix of communal politics, a mix of geopolitics involved, along with the long held anti establishment sentiments against the then Sheikh Hasina's regime. So I think the comparisons here would be completely, you know, off the charts. It would be unfair. It would be incorrect. But however, at the same time, you need to acknowledge the sentiments that are being expressed over here. Because see, when you look at how political movements have come up in the past, if you draw some lessons from history, it's very clear that today public life and political participation has become weakened. Now you go back to French Revolution, for example, where the ideals of liberty were championed, where the focus was on one's individual rights, self-rule, independent choices. And When you compare that with what evolved and developed later on, the capitalist, consumerist culture, the fossil fuel based economies that came up everywhere, it ended up creating more of a private life where individuals eventually became preoccupied with their private choices, right? More than being committed with their public and political goals. Now, in India as well, if you go back to 1960s, 70s, and 80s, let's say you talk to your parents, they'll tell you how politically active school and college campuses were, right? There were these pressure points where they could let out their anger, their frustration, vent out their resentment against the ruling class and the establishment. Universities and colleges, in particular, were very active centers of political mobilization. Look at the emergency period, for example. Much of the current leadership in India, they essentially come from the student led movement of the 60s and 70s. Look at the Mandal politics era. Some of the younger batch of leaders that you have today, they all emerged in the 80s and 90s period, centered around college and university mobilization. Then, even at the local level, at the local city and rural level, at the grassroots level, there would be avenues where people could politically mobilize, express their views, their anger and resentment, and vent out their frustration. And this would eventually lead to a well organized movement that would develop with some amount of centralized leadership, and they would have clear political clarity. They would be committed to achieving certain political goals. But with the emergence of social media, with the emergence of internet, with the emergence of a more self-centered private life, where people are more concerned about what's happening in their own life than what's happening in public, the public life has definitely weakened and political participation has gone down. And people do not have easy avenues to express their anger and resentment, right? So social media becomes an easy platform where you don't have to put in that physical effort to go to a protest, to attend a rally, or to actively be involved in political activities on a day to day basis. Here, you just have to open your phone, either follow a page or like something, share or comment, which is very easy to do, right? So, this is more of a symbolic anger which is coming out. Now, when you have a symbolic enemy in the form of a corrupt leadership, let's say, or a entrenched establishment which doesn't understand the aspirations of the youth, it could be the judiciary, it could be the ruling government, it could be the political class in general. So there would be a symbolic enemy and a target which will mobilize the masses, even though they don't ideologically align with each other, right? Some of the followers of the party, they might be ideologically completely different. Some of them could be even apolitical with no knowledge of political ideologies. But still, they all have one thing in common, which is a common enemy, right? They look at the symbolic meaning and the emotional hunger which is being satiated through a social media driven campaign. Now, will it really translate into real world impact? Can it really influence Indian politics? That's a different question altogether. But of course, you can't dismiss that argument as well, because many experts across the world believe that probably the future of politics could be this. With advances in technology, with AI having a disproportionate impact, probably the old world era of politics could be gone in another few years and decades. And you might see more emotional and short lived political movements and mobilizations, which could become the norm as well. But that said, when you look at the rise of the Cockroach Janata Party, it most likely appears to be a short lived trend, or at least it appears to be limited to a social media impact, not translating into any real world political impact. Yes, there have been a lot of online fights, trolling, arguments, and counter arguments which are broken out, right? Especially some of the loyal followers of the ruling establishment have taken it personally because of the name of the party, Cockroach Janta Party, right? And it has even led to major trolling and political matches being fought on social media between both sides. But that said, you need to understand that in today's modern world, a consumption driven world, a capitalist world, where a fossil fuel driven economy is only creating these individual consumerist choices for you, right? Now, everybody wants good roads, good transportation, some a form of leisure, entertainment. Now, all of this will exist only in a centralized system, right? Only when you have a centralized system, a centralized authority, only then it's possible to provide these consumer choices. But for true collective expression, if you really want genuine political decentralization as well, that will call for active political engagement on the ground, which the youth are unlikely to take part in. Obviously, everybody is busy with their own career goals, their own personal lives, their family, their personal priorities. So, the prioritization of private life, which has happened in the last 2 centuries or so, post industrial revolution, it has obviously reduced the scope for public and actual political participation. That's why social media becomes an easy window to vent that political anger and frustration which is building up, right? Today, how many of you actually engage in college level politics? How many of you engage in local politics in your neighborhood, in your areas? This used to be the norm many decades ago, but not anymore. So social media becomes an easier way, an easier route. But the question is, do they really have a long term vision? Do they really have a solid political agenda? Can they really drive a meaningful political change? Now, the some of the supporters of the CJP and the initial founding leaders, they claim to have brought out a manifesto as well. On the website, you can find this 5 point manifesto. Even a basic reading of the manifesto will tell you that the party as of now is largely misguided and they don't really understand what it requires for political reforms and change to happen. A couple of points on their manifesto seems valid, achievable, practical as well. For example, pushing women's reservation to 50% from the proposed 33% and giving it immediate effect without touching the strength of the parliament so that it addresses the issue of delimitation as well. And the proposal to create 50% reserved cabinet positions for women. This could seem to be a very progressive vision of this party. Then even the provision on anti-defection, as politicians of the old guard, they've betrayed the trust of the voters, jumping from party to party, right? Clearly showing a corrupt nexus as well, with one major party trying to poach from all the other parties present, creating a sort of a monopoly in Indian politics. So definitely such a provision, it is something which is desirable, right? But look at the other provisions here of the manifesto. Ensuring that no Chief Justice ever becomes a Rajya Sabha member as a post retirement benefit, clearly aimed at former CJIs like Ranjan Gogoi. Yes, there have been these question marks on few former judges and Chief Justices, and it's not desirable for those in key positions to seek post retirement benefits. But that can't be your number one manifesto, right? Because the party is not just meant to show its anger against institutions like judiciary. There is one point on election commission where they propose that CEC would be charged as a terrorist if even one legit vote is deleted, which is a reference to the Sir exercise. And they claim to book the CEC under UAPA provisions, which is an anti-terrorism law. Now, this is not just irrational and illogical. It again shows a very poor political understanding of the party, right? Or maybe you can at least give them the benefit of doubt for now, given that it's a mature, just a young party without the required political maturity. But however, a party with such a big following, which has developed in just few days, it will need to show a greater political vision and clarity. It will have to focus on the issues that really bother the youth. You think Gen Z would be really bothered about CJI later getting a Rajya Sabha seat? Would you think the Gen Z would be really bothered about the electoral role and how the SIR exercise is being carried out? Yes, several people associate with these issues, but this will not generate the mass appeal and the mass opinion which is required. Right now, the following which has grown for CJP is mainly driven by the frustration of the Gen Z, the aspirations that they feel are unfulfilled by the current ruling establishment. So, unless and until that is addressed, issues like education, issues like educational reforms, issues like job creation, employment, inflation, unless and until these issues are prioritized, the party will not really have a genuine and legitimate political future. It would just remain as a social media trend. Probably it will even thrive and survive, but it may fail to actually have any kind of political impact on the ground. But again, you never know. If, let's say, this party gets the right amount of guidance by well-known individuals, if let's say it's able to bring in um, well-known experts into its ranks, probably yes, it could develop that political maturity and maybe craft out a clear vision and probably even make some kind of dent or a difference in Indian politics. But as of now, it appears to be too premature to call this as India's biggest political revolution, right? It is primarily a social media trend, a viral trend, which could even die out in next few days as well. So, what do you think about this? Let me know. Have you joined the Cockroach Janta Party? Let me know in the comments. And do you think this party will really survive? Will it really make a political difference on the ground? Let me know your views in the comments. Next, a very interesting article on page 6 related to cyber warfare. Cyber warfare has become an integral part of modern conflict. In the context of the recent Iran war, and as well as in the context of the Ukraine war, the cyber element is very, very clear and evident. Now, take Russia for example. Ever since Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, that is, even before Russia invaded Ukraine, Russia has been engaging in massive cyber warfare operations against Ukraine. It unleashed deadly ransomware attacks known as Petya and not Petya, targeting Ukraine's critical infrastructure and public services and crippling those essential services. These attacks were widely reported in the 2016-2018 period. Then, in the recent Iran war, US and Israel have employed their formidable cyber capabilities. Even before the physical war began, active cyber campaigns were unleashed to dismantle Iran's air defense systems, power networks, communication networks, and to subdue the command control structure. Reportedly, even Iran engaged in counter cyber attacks aimed at US and Israeli critical infrastructure, though with limited success. And also, there is an active attempt to shape the information flow on internet and social media and traditional media through cyber campaigns by some of these states and their intelligence and cybersecurity agencies. So, such active cyber warfare before a war, during a war, after a war, it has become the norm in today's modern conflict. So, the writer is examining, can these cyber warfare incidents, can they be held legally accountable under existing international law? How does international law align with the new trends emerging in warfare? Because see, cyber war is considered as the newest dimension of warfare. Traditionally, we had three dimensions of warfare where wars were fought: land, water, and then air. So we had traditional armed forces like army, navy, air force, respectively, for each of these three domains. Then came outer space. After land, water, air were weaponized and militarized. Then came the militarization of outer space, which became the fourth dimension of warfare. Now we have the fifth dimension, which is your cyberspace. Since 1990s itself, or even going back to 1980s, when the very foundation of internet was laid, since then, governments, militaries, intelligence agencies have been very clear that this could be a potential domain for warfare, and it has evolved and emerged into one. So, in the cyberspace, you can engage in hybrid warfare tactics, where even state cyber threat actors can deny their involvement. They can exercise the right to plausible deniability, plausibly denying their role and involvement, unleashing covert attacks against the target enemy's critical information infrastructure, crippling the critical infrastructure even before the physical war can begin. So, today, through sophisticated malware, it's possible to bring down air defense systems, communication networks, bring down satellite links, or scramble the encrypted communication systems, or even decapitate the command control centers. And thus you will basically weaken the enemy even before the actual physical war can begin. And cyber warfare is also a very powerful tool to shape narrative, to drive information warfare and psychological warfare. So how does this align with international law? Is it really recognized? Any violations in this domain, can it be prosecutable under international law? Can governments be sued if they violate human rights, if they target civilian infrastructure through cyber attacks? That is something we need to understand. Now, when you look at the UN Charter, Article 2, Clause 4, which prohibits the use of force or even the threat of force against a state, this principle will apply for cyberspace as well. So, in theory, the principle of banning the use of force will cover any form of force, not just physical force, but it will also cover cyber attacks as well. It will extend to cyber warfare and even state sponsored cyber attacks using non state cyber actors. Because there are many instances where state entities like Russia, China, even US and Israel are known to engage non state cyber threat actors to launch attacks against their targets. So, from a legal perspective, from the perspective of international law, under the provisions of Article 2, Clause 4 of UN Charter, you can interpret that it extends to cover cyber war as well, meaning it prohibits any form of force being used that could violate the sovereignty and political independence of a state. But however, applying this in practice is where the challenge lies. Because, see, I want you to understand some of the core features of the cyber domain. See, in cyberspace, there are no proper geographical boundaries. In the physical world, we have these boundaries that we have drawn up. Though imaginary, you can physically identify the land borders, the maritime borders, your airspace, meaning you can exercise your sovereignty and jurisdiction in a physical manner. But this is not possible in the virtual world of cyberspace. These geographical boundaries, the concept of territorial jurisdiction does not exist in the cyber domain. The attacker could be sitting in any country, in any part of the world, using proxy servers and VPNs to target a certain country by bouncing the traffic from multiple nations or multiple servers located across multiple countries. So when there are no geographical boundaries and when internet grants you that anonymity, how will you attribute the attack? Because see, to exercise the right to self-defense and or even to, let's say, bring a legal proceeding against another state which is engaged in illegal cyber warfare, you should be able to first attribute the attack to that state actor. This is where the problem lies. See, on the internet, with the right skills and technology, you can completely become anonymous, concealing your identity, your location, your IP address. So, with this level of anonymity and with sophisticated military grade malware being deployed by both state and non state actors, it is very, very difficult to attribute the attack. Now, if you can't attribute the attack to a state actor with evidence, then your legal case will fall apart. So, in practice, it's not viable to take the legal route as it may not be entertained by the courts. Now, without attribution, you cannot establish your traditional security concepts such as retaliation and deterrence. See, in the real physical world, we have the concepts of retaliation and deterrence through which you strengthen your own security. You punish the enemy who has attacked you first. You retaliate against them. You draw those red lines and thresholds and create a future deterrence against future attacks. But this idea cannot work in the cyber domain as you can't even attribute the attack. Though you might have a sense, a political and intelligence assessment can be made as to who might be the attacker. You may lack the evidence that is required to prove the involvement of a state actor. And that will become the biggest problem, right? See, intelligence agencies, the security establishment, and the political class, they might conclude which country might be behind these attacks, right? They will have a certain clarity based on the intelligence that they have, classified information that they have access to, but they will not have 100% foolproof evidence which can be used for prosecution in a court of law. So, without attribution and without the right evidence available, then the legality of this whole proceeding will collapse. And also, please understand the whole domain of cyber warfare is largely classified. It's under the domain of intelligence cybersecurity agencies, where transparent public information may not be available. So, most countries they will think that it's better to handle these incidents either through political diplomatic channels or through their own covert cyber attacks through their intelligence and cybersecurity agencies. They would prefer this route instead of taking the legal route, because they know that if they approach international court of justice, let's say for example, if they try to sue the state, seek reparations for the losses and damage suffered, ICJ may not even entertain the case, because ICJ would require consent from all the 193 UN member states, which may not be available. Plus, the country which is projecting itself as the victim of a cyber warfare attempt, it may not have all the evidence to attribute the attack to another country and blame the attack on that country. So, this may not be the right route. Then, using domestic courts is again not viable, right? They would not have that kind of jurisdiction to even enforce the orders against another state. So the legal route will largely fail in practice, though in theory, in principle, uh, you can seek remedial action, but it is not practically viable. That's why the writer fears that cyber warfare has already moved ahead of legal accountability. And that's why the cyber domain, particularly cyber warfare, operates largely in the classified domain, and most of the operations are covert. We do have international conventions that provides for cooperation between governments, such as the Budapest Convention on Cybercrimes, brought out by the Council of Europe. More than 60 countries are part of it, primarily Western democracies. India had considered joining the Budapest Convention, but later we have backed out. Mainly because of security reasons, India has decided not to join the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. Then recently, the United Nations, for the first time, has adopted a global convention against cybercrime. India is a party to it, and all countries will be signing and ratifying it, and it will come into effect very soon. And it will be a legally binding treaty. But however, please understand both these conventions, they deal only with cybercrime, not with cyber warfare. Cyber warfare is primarily between state actors, one state attacking another state, right? Whereas cyber crimes are primarily the work of non state cyber criminal cartels. The cyber criminal cartels, which engage in cyber fraud, digital arrests, and other scams and scandals to steal your data, your money, right? So these conventions primarily cover cyber crimes. It does not deal with cyber warfare. So there are no provisions here to hold state actors accountable. So these conventions are again not really reliable or useful in case of cyber warfare, and you can't pursue any legal action through these routes. That's why countries are preferring to deal with it diplomatically or through their covert intelligence methods or through political channels. That's why the writer is urging India to lead the world to try and shape and define the new cyber norms, where countries which blatantly misuse cyber warfare to target civilian infrastructure, to cause significant civilian and economic harm, they can be held liable through a well designed global framework. So, the writer is urging India to try and shape this global discussion and global narrative on how to bring legal accountability for cyber warfare. Next, we have a few small topics. Let's quickly cover them and wrap up the session. On page 9, we have an article related to India-Cyprus relations. As I told you earlier at the start of the session, the president of Cyprus was on a visit to India and some new agreements have been signed. Now, please understand, India has been cultivating a very close strategic partnership with Cyprus. Last year in 2025, Prime Minister Modi had carried out a high profile visit to Cyprus. So, this visit by the Cypriot president to India is a continuation of this diplomatic engagement. So, first, I want you to understand where Cyprus is located. Why is it relevant for India? See, Cyprus is located here in the Eastern Mediterranean region, and it's a member of the European Union. It currently holds the presidency of the Council of the European Commission, and it is like a strategic gateway to access the European markets. It can be a strategic link for the IMEC corridor that has been proposed at the G20, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. And also, there is a strategic geopolitical angle as well for India's engagement with Cyprus, which is linked with the Cypriot conflict involving Turkey and Greece as well. See, Cyprus has been divided, with Greece backing the country of Cyprus that you see here, which is a member of the EU, and Turkey backing the northern Cypriot population. So, northern Cyprus, which has claimed to have broken apart from Cyprus, is recognized only by Turkey. Only the government of Turkey recognizes northern Cyprus. Turkey reportedly has troops deployed here as well. There has been a history of conflict between the Cypriots, the Greek Cypriots, the Turkish Cypriots. And Greece is involved here with direct support for Cyprus, and Turkey with support for the Turkish Cypriot community in the northern part of Cyprus. Though no country in the world recognizes northern Cyprus, Turkey recognizes this as an independent nation. So there's an active conflict present. In fact, there are maritime disputes as well over the exclusive economic zone jurisdiction involving Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey. Now, India's engagement with Cyprus is seen as an axis that we are cultivating by engaging Cyprus, Greece, and even Armenia. It's believed that India is cultivating its own alliance to counterbalance the nexus between Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Pakistan. In the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, while Turkey continued to actively back Azerbaijan, India started arms supplies and defense partnership with Armenia and became one of the key supplier of military hardware. Right? India even supplied air defense systems, radars, etc. Now we are looking to build close defense and strategic ties with Cyprus. During the visit, we have signed a MOU on defense partnership and defense cooperation, and Cyprus is very keen to buy Indian defense platforms. We are stepping up our naval military engagement, our maritime security engagement with Greece. Greece is going to be a key gateway for European markets, and especially in the IMEC corridor. Greek ports such as the Piraeus port will be one of the key links that would link India with the European markets. And it would help us counterbalance the Turkey, Pakistan, Azerbaijan nexus. So there are both economic and trade opportunities involved, along with connectivity to Europe, plus a security and strategic dimension to this relationship, where we can boost our defense exports and counterbalance the nexus between Turkey, Pakistan, and Azerbaijan. So that's the context in which this relationship acquires significance. And now that we have signed a FTA with European Union, relations with Cyprus will become all the more important. So if India were to realize the IMEC vision, countries like Cyprus would be key. Cyprus has already said that it will drive this initiative, and as the president of the Council of European Commission, it has already created a IMEC group within the EU, and it's trying to convince many other EU partners to align with India and the other West Asian partners to realize the IMEC corridor. So this could be a game changer. And that's why our relations with Cyprus is extremely important. Next, on the front page, there's an article related to UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. The UAPA 1967 is our primary anti-terror law, which has been amended several times. Though it was introduced in 1967 following the India-China, India-Pakistan wars, mainly to deal with unlawful activities. Today, it has been transformed with all these amendments into our premier anti-terror legislation. So the UAPA is enforced by counter-terror law enforcement agencies such as National Investigation Agency or NIA. So the UAPA contains some very stringent provisions. It defines terrorism. It covers terror financing. It covers membership of a terror organization or any kind of support extended to terrorist activities, both direct and indirect. It even covers overground support, and any participation in terror activities is punishable with very strict penalties. But one provision which is very controversial under UAPA is the stringent bail norm. Once charged with UAPA, it's almost impossible to get bail, as Section 43 provides a very stringent restriction on granting bail to terror accused. Now, there's a lot of criticism against the law that it's blatantly misused by police and law enforcement. And they even target political dissent, critics of the government, of the ruling party, charge them with anti terror laws, and ensure that they remain in jail for months and years together, as bail becomes almost impossible under UAPA charges. When you look at the conviction rate remains quite low, and it has raised concern about the misuse of the law. The accused will end up remaining in jail for several months and even few years, right? And even before they are held guilty, before their guilt is proven in a court of law, the trial process itself becomes a punishment for them. So this has been a matter of controversy, with critics calling out the stringent no bail provision of UAPA multiple times. So now the Supreme Court of India has called for a further reference on this question. It has asked a larger bench, most likely a constitution bench, to take a look at the conflict between UAPA provisions versus Article 21, which guarantees right to life and dignity. This was in relation to the 2020 Delhi riots case, where some of the accused, they are still undergoing trial and they have been denied bail, imagine, for 6 years. They've spent the last 6 years in jail even before their guilt has been proven in the court. So the court has recognized the process itself becoming a punishment, and it has granted bail for 6 months. An interim bail has been granted, and it has referred the matter to a higher bench so that the constitutionality of the stringent bail norms of UAPA can be re-examined. Then, coming to the next article, there has been a lot of global alarm and concern about the recent Ebola outbreak in Africa. So, following the latest outbreak and rising cases in African countries and the alert issued by WHO, India has urged the state governments and union territories to start taking precautionary measures. So, first of all, what is Ebola? Ebola is a deadly infectious disease which is epidemic in Africa. Detected for the first time in 1976 near the Ebola River in today's Democratic Republic of Congo. That's why it's named after the Ebola River itself. And cases have been repeatedly seen in parts of Sudan and South Sudan, in Uganda, and few other African nations. Now, this deadly disease is caused by a family of viruses from the Filoviridae family, particularly from the Ortho Ebola virus genus. And at least three major strains have been noted in the past. We have the Ebola virus disease caused by the Ebola virus strain, the Sudan virus strain causing the Sudan virus disease, and the more recent Bundi Bugyo virus causing the BVD. All these are different strains of Ebola virus disease. Initially, the infected person will display flu like symptoms, fever, rashes, nausea, vomiting, but it can escalate very, very quickly, even leading to internal and external bleeding. And the mortality rate is extremely high. The mortality rate on an average is at 50% and above, but it can vary anywhere between 20 to even up to 80%. In most outbreaks seen in the past, mortality rates have been above 50%. And that's where the real fear comes from. Now, the main host of these viruses are fruit bats. Fruit bats are considered to be the vector, the carrier, and it is known to make a zoonotic jump quite easily with the right contact. When humans come in contact with the fluids and the blood or the excretion of the fruit bats and other infected animals, the virus can make a zoonotic jump. And once humans are infected, the human to human spread is also quite easy because it spreads through close contact, through direct contact, especially through broken skin, through bodily fluids, even through clothing and bedding material, right? It can spread very easily, infecting all the people who come in contact with the infected patient. That's why even handling the dead body of Ebola patient is considered to be very, very hazardous. And usually, the dead are cremated without contact, or sometimes they are incinerated and burnt, because even the dead body could be extremely contagious for whoever tries to handle the cremation process. So it's one of the most fearsome diseases. But again, as of now, it doesn't display the pandemic potential. It doesn't display the global spread potential. It remains endemic to specific regions, can be seen as a localized epidemic. But the latest outbreak in DRC and as well as in Uganda is indeed a matter of great concern. The WHO has issued a public health emergency of international concern, asking all countries to be on the alert. Because given the nature of global trade and international travel, it's quite easy for infected patients to carry the strain back home to their countries and spread it across the world, which then potentially, with sufficient mutations, can turn into the next big pandemic. So, naturally, with the latest outbreak, there is a lot of concern and alarm. But again, there's no need to panic. As of now, India is completely safe from Ebola, and we are taking all the precautionary measures. By drawing the lessons from COVID pandemic and the management of COVID-19, the center has already directed the states to leverage the IDSP, the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program. So India has a very efficient epidemiological control program where constant alert is maintained to look out for any symptoms of certain specific diseases, especially those with a travel history to the affected regions, those who are coming from African countries, especially from Sudan, DRC, Uganda, etc. They would be under enhanced surveillance, and any such symptoms which might be reported could be flagged at the local level itself. And once such cases are traced, immediate protocols and standard operating procedures will be initiated. From quarantine and isolation to scaling up testing and contact tracing would be done. And the government has already set up the NIV, the National Institute of Virology in Pune, as the designated agency for testing the samples. And the states are being given the required support from the central government to ensure that the standard protocols are followed. Next, coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look. We have three small articles. On the front page, there's an article based on the Sample Registration Survey 2024 report. Now, what is this SRS report or Sample Registration Survey report? See, it is brought out by the Office of the Registrar General of India, which is under the Ministry of Home Affairs, which also conducts the national census. Now, this report, the SRS survey, Sample Registration Survey, it basically gives you demographic data. It keeps track of birth rates, death rate, infant mortality rate in the country. It will help you understand the demographic trends that are developing, the demographic transition that a country might go through. So, birth rate is nothing but the number of live births per thousand population. Similarly, death rate is nothing but the number of deaths occurring per thousand population. Now, when you look at the latest report, there is a significant drop in birth rate. In 2014, birth rate was 21 live births per thousand population, which has dropped to 18.3. Death rate also has seen a slight decline from previous 6.7 to 6.4. Now, this is a clear sign of Indian population undergoing a demographic transition. It means fertility rates are slowing down, death rates have pretty much stayed the same with a slight reduction, and eventually this will translate into a normal growth rate where the population stabilization will occur, and after a certain point, after hitting the peak, you will start seeing a decline in the population where death rates might start increasing in the coming decades, birth rates would also fall, fertility rates would also fall. Now, when you look at IMR, infant mortality rate, which was previously at 39, has now dropped to 24. India has done pretty well in terms of its public healthcare, institutional delivery, and infant healthcare that directly reflects in the infant mortality rate. But however, there is a stark difference between rural areas and urban areas. In general, urban areas perform better in terms of lower death rate and lower infant mortality rate. That again highlights some of the gaps in public healthcare in rural areas. But when you look at infant mortality rate, the state of Kerala is the best performer in the country. Its IMR has dropped to single digits with the IMR of just 8 infant mortality recorded per thousand live births. This is followed by Tamil Nadu in the second place. Okay, amongst the larger states, Kerala, Tamil Nadu are at the top in terms of infant mortality rate, with Kerala having a IMR of just 8 deaths per thousand live births. Then among the smaller states and union territories, Goa is the best performing state with regard to the near or the natural growth rate or the normal growth rate I was referring to, followed by Andaman Nicobar Islands. They even have the best IMR indicators amongst the smaller states. So just being aware of this demographic data will help you understand the demographic trends, the population trends, and even predict demographic transition, which is going to come up. So states like Kerala would first encounter the aging population. They would, in coming years, see a significant increase in death rate and a further slowdown in birth rate. And this helps in policy making. Next, on page 12, there's an economy article related to the topic of variable repo rate or variable rate repo auction. The RBI has used the VRR auction to infuse short-term liquidity into the system. Now, what do you mean by VRR auction? That's something you need to understand. See, all of you, I'm sure, know about repo rate. It's the rate at which RBI lends to commercial banks in the country. It's the key monetary policy tool of the RBI used to manage liquidity and contain inflation or boost growth, depending on the trends in the economy. So, generally, repo rate has a fixed rate, which is fixed by your monetary policy committee, correct? But for short-term liquidity infusion, RBI employs liquidity adjustment facility, LAF, where different monetary tools are employed in the short term to infuse that immediate liquidity that's required. So VRR auctions, they make use of a variable interest rate determined through market auctions. So it's exactly repo rate. Just like repo rate, the rate at which RBI lends to banks, VRR is exactly the same. Only difference is that in the lead monetary tool, in the primary monetary tool, the Monetary Policy Committee of RBI fixes the repo rate. There's a standard fixed rate at which the repo rate remains. But in VRR auctions, RBI allows the market to determine the variable rate through auctions. So this rate will vary depending on the auction, on how it goes. So this infuses short-term liquidity into the system under the liquidity adjustment facility of the RBI. Next, another topic related to RBI. The RBI has approved a surplus dividend transfer of 2.86 lakh crores to the coffers of Government of India. Now you think you're earning good interest and dividend through your investments. See what the government is earning. This is the biggest ever RBI surplus transfer to Government of India. Previously, the highest was 2.69 lakh crores in the last fiscal. And now the government is earning a massive dividend of 2.86 lakh crores. So there are 2 points you have to understand here. Point number one, how does RBI really generate surplus? Meaning it is generating a profit. Where is this profit coming from? Now, this is a question I would leave for you. I want you to take this up as an exercise. Can you find out the revenue generating sources for RBI? How does RBI really make a profit? What are those sources through which RBI is earning a surplus revenue? Please mention that in the comments. I can give you one example. For example, RBI manages the forex market from where it can actually generate profits. So find out other avenues through which RBI is generating this surplus revenue. Please mention that in the comments. Second, why should RBI give the dividend to Government of India? Why can't it keep the surplus with itself? That's because the central government is the only owner of RBI. Under the RBI Act, the Government of India has 100% ownership of RBI. So naturally, whatever profit surplus is generated, RBI will take a part of it to account for its operational expenses, and the rest is transferred. The rest of the surplus is transferred as dividend to the owner, which is the Government of India. So now find out the sources through which RBI is making this massive profit and mention that in the comments. On this note, I bring the session to an end. I hope it was an interesting and useful session. If you liked it, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.